Well, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Hello and welcome to the Global Industry Performance Review 2021 preview session with Exhibition World. I'm Paul Colston, the managing editor of Exhibition World, and have had the privilege of a preview of this treasure trove of content in preparing our recent magazine feature on the 2021 edition of the GIPR report, and its valuable contents, including never before published insights into the Chinese market and hands-on advice for omnichannel strategy. Today, we're hosting an exclusive opportunity to hear about the GIPR direct from the team at JWC Consultancy, who researched it and put it all together. We're privileged to have Jochen Witt, President and CEO of JWC, and a man with an extensive exhibition industry biography, including being a former president of UFI, and also project digital lead Julian Schmetz, who's brought considerable analytical knowledge and his special research skill set into this project. He certainly helped guide me through what all the numbers and trends may mean for our businesses, including where the opportunities and the value lie. The guys on the JWC team will give us all a taster of what you can expect from having a full copy of the new Global Industry Performance Review, especially the extra elements and coverage for 2021, and I'll let them tell you all about that. They're also ready to answer your questions, so be sure to send them in written form for the short Q&A that will follow Jochen's presentation, and the Q&A will be curated by my colleague Simon Farnfield. So as things occur to you, please be active there so that we have some nice questions for Jochen and for Julian, who will also be answering them. Thank you again for attending. We hope to justify a return on your valuable time. And without any further ado, I hand over to Mr. Jochen Witt.
Thanks for all the guys in Australia for staying up so long. Thanks for all of the guys in the United States for staying up so early, and thanks for everybody in Europe for, I would say, sacrificing their lunchtime. So welcome everybody, and I'm happy that we have such a great number of attendances here. And I would just like to say we run through this GIPR in a way where we say that you get a taste of what it is all about. The entire GIPR report is in the area of 200 to 200 plus pages, condensed analysis with kind of different focus areas. And I just want to start with that and tell you a little bit about what we've done here in terms of analysis. To give you a little taste here, it's about 6 months of work which went into that, six months of research work. So there are areas in there which we believe are really of tremendous value. So let's start and look really what we have, and just a brief overview of what the contents of this year's GIPR are. First of all, we have what we call macroeconomic indicators and exhibition industry performance. Tell you a little bit later what that is, what that means basically. In a second chapter, we look at the companies, and from those who have listened to my presentations at UFI, I would say the first and the second chapter is about what from the structure, from the content, what I've always showed at the UFI congresses in the last sort of 10 years. A new chapter we have, as Paul already indicated, is the Chinese market. We have a special on the Chinese market. Many people already have asked, so why Chinese market? I will explain that later, because we feel, so I can already say that today, we feel that the Chinese market will really drive the growth in our industry, and it is worthwhile looking at this market. And last but not least, something where Julian also has put a lot of effort in is the research work on digital and omnichannel model. It's about 60 pages of really condensed research work, and we'll get to that later. So let's start with the first chapter, macroeconomic indicators and exhibition industry performance. We have in this chapter we have 6 subsectors. Global macroeconomic indicators, a little bit about the global economy. It's very, very important. Policy responses, how were they in the different countries? Performance of related industries. So how did industries perform which are related to ours? Future economic climate is also very important, because also but the question what drives the future economic climate. Global performance of the exhibition industry would then be the fifth chapter, and the last chapter here would be regional and country by country analysis. So let's start. And again, it's an overview. It's not a complete presentation, because then you would be sitting here most likely for a whole day. So it's an overview to give you a taste of what we will show in the full GIPR report. Let's start with the macroeconomic side. And what you see here is I would say 6 major economies: USA, Eurozone, Japan, China, India, and ASEAN, and how they sort of performed in that crisis. And you see in 2020, which is natural, all those economies really had a tough time. But the one economy which is coming back quite smoothly and quite quickly are the United States. And you see what the economists classically describe as a V-shaped recovery very, very nicely here in the United States. Of course, that is driven, as we'll see in a moment, that is very much driven by the amount of money the government of the United States has put into the economy. The country which is sort of suffering hardest from the pandemic is clearly India, and you see that sort of wide orange area where you see basically that is the loss in output in that country, and that is quite tremendous. Now, bear in mind that this was an outlook basically in April 2021. That was at a point of time where India was still faring well with the pandemic situation. That has changed, so the situation in that country might even worsen. Now let's go ahead and say, okay, how did governments respond to COVID-19? And on the left-hand side, you see the total government expenditure as percentage of GDP. And you can see, of course, all these expenditures of the governments increased tremendously in 2020. Very, very clearly. Now they are forecasted to be reduced again in the future. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of money went into the economies, a tremendous amount, as it is expressed in percentage of GDP. It's not an absolute number, but the absolute numbers are significant. If you look at the right-hand side of the slide, what you see basically here is the additional spend the countries have done in the pandemic or as a consequence of the pandemic. And you see the huge amount of money which went in the United States into the economy. And it is not only, as you can see here on the right-hand side in these blue columns, it is not only 2020, it is also foreseen for 2021, and it is also foreseen for 2022. It's the same in China. Again, when you look at the percentage of GDP, in China, you don't, and in the United States, you don't see that as much because GDP is so high, but in absolute terms, the amount of money which went into the economy is tremendous. Now, let's look to the next chapter. And again, I mean, each of these chapters has a multi-analysis in there, and I try only to show you some of the highlights. We looked basically at 2 crises. First of all, the financial crisis, what happened there, and then basically this pandemic situation. And then we also said, okay, let's compare how the financial crisis affected different industries and how this crisis is affecting different industries. And what you see here very nicely on the top left block basically is what we call the high contact industries. And those high contact industries, yes, they have also been affected by the financial crisis, which shows you the red line there. The red line shows you the effects of the financial crisis 2008. So we can say high contact industries have been affected. But the tremendous effect you see here is really in the pandemic, where you see basically that the spiral down is tremendous, and it is even much deeper than in other industries, which we've shown on in the other blocks. So the pandemic, it is very, very clear one message, had a most significant effect on what we call high contact industries, and certainly the exhibition and conference industry is part of that high contact industry. I think it's a very interesting comparison, particularly because we compare industries and we compare previous crises here. Now let's move on and let's look basically a little bit ahead. What will drive the world? What will drive the business in the future? And we believe that vaccination is a major factor in the outlook for the global economy. And what we've done here is to say, okay, what are the perspectives for a global vaccination? Because we feel if people are not globally vaccinated, travel will always be restricted. Not always, but at least until vaccination for all the global people globally has taken place. And here you see a little bit of a prediction how vaccination might roll out over the next years. And you see that, for example, in most of Africa, the earliest the people will be vaccinated will be 2023, but also parts of Asia will come in later, parts of South America also. Which means, of course, for our business, that first of all, we will have to live with a lot of hygiene and safety measures in our shows. But secondly, that travel will be affected in the one way or the other. And we have a big section also in this GIPR. What are the effects of travel restrictions and so on? What are expected when we will be back on with travel capacities, with airline capacities and so on. So moving ahead is now let's say, how did our industry perform in this crisis? And what we've done in the past, for those of you who have seen my UFI presentations, you've always seen this sort of slide on the left side here, where we basically show the growth rates of the exhibition business in various countries. And these are all net space comparison. And what you see basically here very, very clearly in the last decade, from 2010 to 2019, the business has been driven by the emerging economies, particularly China. Now, when you go ahead and you look at the right-hand side of the slide and you see basically what happened in 2020, China was the country which was least affected, but China is also the country which will be out of the crisis earliest. Very, very clearly, we have no doubt that this is going to happen. We might have been even a little bit more positive on China. Sorry. We might have even be a little bit more positive in China if we don't see that. I think the momentum we have in China and the Chinese market is a little bit broken through the COVID crisis. And we also believe that a number of companies will simply not survive that crisis. So all in all, I think China will be back fairly quickly to pre-COVID levels. And let's now look into what we call the regional analysis, and we've done that for all major exhibition countries. We've done that also for areas like Europe, for Asia, for the Americas, and we looked at revenue, we looked at square meters, and did all the comparison. I just want to show you one example, and that is Germany. What you see here in Germany are the green curve on the left side, that is company revenue, and that company revenue in the last decade has increased by 37 percentage points. But all the other indicators like net space, visitors, exhibitors, and number of shows, they were basically stagnant. We have a cyclical business in Germany with the even years being, I call it the good years, and the odd years being not so good years. And what we believe in is that the German trade fair business will be have quite some hard time to recover, simply because the German trade fair business is highly international and so very, very much depending on travel. And travel, as we demonstrate in this report, travel will be affected for, we would say, at least 2 to 3 years, maybe even longer, depending on, as we said before, how vaccination goes. So now let's look at, come to the next chapter, financial performance of the top 40. We have again 4 sub-chapters here: revenues and operating results, operational and financial insights, industry rankings, and market shares of leading companies. I do go through this very quickly. I mean, it's far more extensive in the report, but to give you a taste of that, this is basically the development of the top 40 companies in the world over the last 10 or now it's 11 years, and you see the huge drop in 2020. No surprise, we all know about it, but what is remarkable here, it is the first time I think, since 40 or 50 years, that the trade fair industry has so significantly decoupled from the general GDP development. That has never been the case before, not even in the financial crisis, also a little bit, but not so to the extent which we can see here. The other message here is that venue owning companies and non-venue owning companies basically had the same drop in revenues, so very, very similar. That was also a little bit different in the past. The revenue development for the non-venue owning companies was always a little bit better than for the venue owning companies. So let's move on. And here what we did is basically we tried to understand what kind of financial results or losses incurred for all these top companies. And on the vertical line, we have operating results as percentage of 2020 revenue. And on the horizontal line, we have 2020 revenue loss as percentage of 2019 revenue. And you see basically across the board with some companies, basically, I would say, being affected more than others across the board, huge losses. Some losses were mitigated by insurance proceeds, others also by additional, let's say, retainment of deposits from exhibitors. But in some, we could say the losses were tremendous. And you can see that here, that they were widespread basically throughout the industry. And this is our new industry ranking. On the left-hand side, you see the industry ranking basically for 2019. And on the right-hand side, it is for 2020. And it is no surprise. The scale on the top of that is hugely different. You see the scale on the top on the left-hand side goes up to 2.5 billion. And the scale on the right-hand side goes only up to 1 billion. So, I mean, you see what kind of revenue losses the industry has incurred here. Now let's move to the Chinese market. And again, we have 4 subchapters. First of all, exhibition market, a country view, overall view, comparison of 3 major economic circles. We say economic clusters or circles, and a zoom on major cities also, and an outlook. So what we have here is basically we start with an overall country view and analyze, let's say, all major KPIs, basically saying square meters, exhibitors, visitors, but also industries and so on. Then we move basically into 3 economic clusters, which I will show you in a moment. And then we zoom into major cities which are not located in these clusters and also give an outlook. So what are these 3 economic clusters? It's basically one in the south. It's the Pearl River Delta cluster. And then one in the center, it's the Yangtze River Delta cluster. And then in the north, it's the Beijing, Tianjin, Hebei cluster. All of those 3 clusters, they compose about a little bit more than 40% of the overall venue capacity in China. So they are clearly the driving force for the exhibition business in the country. Now, going ahead, we were always talking about a lot of venue capacity being developed, and we've done some research to see, well, okay, what's happening in the venue capacity in the country. And you see the red block is venues under construction, where you see we have right now, as we are speaking, 19 venues under construction in the country, with a total space, indoor exhibition space of 2.4 million square meters, and an average space per venue of 130,000 square meters. On top of that, we have planned venues, exactly 18, with a total capacity of 1.8 million square meter and the average space of about 100,000 square meters. So what you see basically is the venue extension and venue expansion is continuing in China big time. And but the other thing also, which is important, there is a lot of new venue capacity coming to the market outside of these economic clusters, and that of course opens up a tremendous amount of opportunities for organizers to move out of these, let's say, key clusters which we used to have on the East Coast and which we're still there, with Shanghai, Shenzhen, and partially also Beijing being the top destinations for organizers. But here, a lot of new venue space is coming to the market, and we believe that will also drive the business in the future. So let's move on. We've listed the top shows also. This is not basically to show you a ranking, but it is just to give you an idea how large the shows in China are. These are now all growth spaces. I have to say there is one caveat behind it. The data basis in China is, I would say, very, very volatile. There are very different data. We believe this data is correct, and it gives a fair picture of those shows. Of course, there are many more shows in that size, but just to give you an idea that the amount of shows, big size shows, is really high. On the other end, where we say there are a lot of big shows, the other point here is that there are also a tremendous number of small shows. What you see here basically is that nearly 90% of the shows are below 100,000 square meters gross. It is not net, it is gross space. Yeah, so you could assume it's most likely somewhere in the area of 40 to 50,000 net. So 90% of all the shows in China are sort of below that level, and the average gross size of a show is 50,000 square meters to about 25,000 net. So you get a feeling basically for the structure of the Chinese market. On the one hand, we have a huge number of big shows, but the vast majority of shows is really small, and it's basically, I think, due to the fact that a lot of we have a lot of markets within China, and shows are sort of looking for these markets, and they stay at a certain size level, and they have a difficulty to grow. Now, if we look a little bit at these four clusters, or three clusters plus the rest of China, we see on the left-hand side the gross rented space, the GDP, and the GDP per capita, and you see the differences. I mean, GDP per capita, for example, is the largest in the Pearl River Delta. It's the largest of all clusters. It is no surprise. It's mainly driven by particularly the Shenzhen area, where the GDP per capita is tremendously high. But then if you compare that basically to gross rented space to GDP, again, the Pearl River Delta is leading. But when you compare that to GDP per capita, of course, it's a natural, because the GDP per capita is so high, the gross rented space per GDP per capita is lower. The interesting thing is when you look at the very, very right side of the slide, where you see the rest of China, you see basically that the gross rented space to GDP per capita is fairly high. There are two factors playing a role here. First of all, of course, the GDP per capita in that area is lower than in all the other clusters, so that drives this kind of picture. And then also the rented space, the gross rented space, is in total fairly high. So that's where it comes to this high number. Now, what is the outlook for China? We have basically here two parts. On the left-hand side, you see the post-development, and on the right-hand side, you see a future outlook. Post-development, as I said many times, it has been very impressive. Venue capacity in the last 10 years has doubled. Net rented space has increased by more than 70%, and organizer revenues have more than doubled also. So tremendous development in the last 10 years. We believe that China will continue on that trajectory, first of all, because it is becoming the largest consumer market in the world. It's favorable for exhibition business in that regard. They have the pandemic under control. Shows are starting at big time already, large scale. New venues, as I've said before, coming to the market, and these are not the old venues, which some of you know 20 years ago. These are high quality venues, so they place a lot of focus on the venue quality. There are already many shows which we see in specific sectors, but due to the market structure of the country, there are a lot of shows possible basically in the same sector, but in different market areas, I would say. Then we also expect more of the business to move west. When you remember the slide where we showed the new venue development, yes, there will be more capacity moving to the west, and there will be more shows following that. And last but not least, the quality of the show has steadily improved, and we expect that the domestic organizers will also adapt to that. There is one caveat to that. The debt level of the Chinese companies is the highest in the world, and if there is a kind of, I would say, crash, then of course things will change dramatically. That's a little bit the risk side here. Okay, let's move on and now come to the chapter which has been researched particularly by Julien for many months, I would say. It's called Rush into Virtual and Omnichannel. It's about 60 pages, full of let's say research work, full of research work with regard to digital, and also with a recommendation where our industry should move on to. Again, 6 sub-chapters: megatrends. What are the megatrends stimulating our digital business? What are the digital offerings in the exhibition industry? Rush into virtual. What's the impact on our industry? Lessons from the retail industry. So we look basically what does the retail industry doing, and then omni-channel business model, and then recommendation. We don't go through all of those. It would be too much, but you can expect in the report that each of these chapters is dealt with in detail and really in-depth analysis. Let's start a little bit and say, okay, what were the major drivers for the digital business? First of all, globalization has lost steam. I think that's something we can see clearly. It's picking up again, but it has lost steam. We have reduction in travel capacities, not only capacities, but this hesitancy to travel. Companies are hesitant to send people to large events and to send many people to large events. And then you see on the other side, the COVID has basically driven many companies into digital, I would say, digital adoption. Yeah. So the industries are getting used to deal with digital. And I think that's also something, if our customers are getting used to do that, I think our industry, we should follow and we should do the same. Now, what is now the difference when it comes to face-to-face events and the traditional physical business model and the platform-based offerings? We look at some major differences here. First of all, monetization. We know that in the traditional business, it's very high, but in the digital business, it's yet to be determined, we would say. Cash flow in the classical model, early, very nice, everybody loves it. But in the digital, we see high upfront investment. Predictability, we see in the F2F part, it's high to very high, we would say. And the digital part, we would think it is not as high or even low in the very beginning. Complexity in the F2F business, we consider it to be fairly low, but in the digital business, it's fairly high because an organizer has to understand basically what kind of digital offerings an industry, an exhibitor group, and so on wants, what they need, and what are the touch points. The exhibitor's willingness to pay, it is very high for market-leading events, yet to be determined in the digital part. And we see many organizers who just do trial and error, which we think is a big mistake, because either you get it wrong on the low side, or you get it right, you get it wrong on the high side. But trial and error rarely makes you get it right from the beginning. And of course, there are methods which also we apply, where we really can find out what are the customers willing to pay also for digital offerings. Yeah. Last but not least, workforce requirement. We've discussed it very often in the industry, is to say, in the traditional business, we have mostly business and sales profiles. And now moving to digital, we need a totally different breed of people, which will have an effect on our culture in the industries, which will have an effect on our processes in the industries, and the way simply how we work. And I think these are the major difference. And one thing, when we go to the first thing, monetization, one thing we always think we need to be more specific on, and that is monetization. I don't want to show you all of that because it's very wordy here, but one thing is important here in this picture. When we talk about monetization of digital, forget about this direct monetization where you say, now I create so much cash flow from my digital activities. There is much more behind that. There is strengthening the customer relationship. There is a support for physical event. There is new lead generation. There is extension of reach behind that. So all things which you might not be able to attribute directly to your digital activities. So the thing we are saying is, let's get away from the notion of monetizing a digital event. It is not the right direction. Let's think about digital as something where we say, okay, what does it mean for our entire business, including physical and including digital? and how can we monetize directly, but also, as you can see here, indirectly. And again, in this part, we have a number of analysis where you can really see how, let's say, at least our philosophy is all about that. Now, when it comes basically to platform business, we have a lot of platforms, and the amount of platforms to offer digital services for the exhibition business has exploded, I would say. Now, this is an illustrative list. We don't have a contract with any of those. It's just really illustrative. And we just said, okay, for the large companies, for the large exhibition companies, they can go ahead and create own platforms and so on, but very small ones, they have difficulties. So as a consequence, we have a huge amount of platforms, and we've looked at the selection of them and then said, okay, what do? They have live staged sessions. They can sort of digitalize exhibitor booths. They have AI matchmaking, networking, engagement, and so on. So each platform has a kind of different offering, and then it is a difficulty for the organizer or even the venue will be to select the platform which delivers the most value, and that is not easy to do. So because the choice is amazing, and how important that is, you can see basically when you look at the valuation of these platforms over the last years. We've again made a selection here, which is Open, Bizabu, and up to GRIP. And what you see here, the most fascinating thing for us was when we looked at this, is to say there is one company, that's Hopin, which today has a valuation which is higher than any exhibition company. And that, I think, is an amazing thing, but it also shows what the market expectations are with regard to these kind of digital platforms. It is fascinating. Now, what does it mean, digital? For us, it means that there is an F2F event and there are digital activities. Now, these digital activities, they should not transfer the F2F event one-to-one into the, let's say, internet. We consider the, let's say, future of our business to be in a way to say, okay, an exhibition company, an organizer, will only be successful if that organizer offers matchmaking and communication services independent of time, independent of location, and independent of medium. So basically all year round. And this is what we try to express here, to say, okay, yes, we have some peaks, so to say. These might be the physical events, but might also be some digital events. But there must be a permanent communication for the community on the community platform to basically offer added value. It can be content, it can be products, it can be services. It really depends on the industry. And here we have sort of tried to show how different these aspects are. Because when you look at the key, some of the key USPs of a show, it is networking, it is learning, it is knowledge, it is transacting, and it is other characteristics which the show has. And here we looked and say, okay, which part of our business, the physical or the digital, can deliver in which USP better? And you can see here, for example, in the networking part, you see the physical can deliver better on social presence, but the digital can most likely deliver better on matchmaking or maintaining a connection. And in that regard, we cannot say it is either or, it is always and. So we need physical and digital, and we need that digital all year round, and we need that digital to build a community platform for selected industries. So this closes basically a brief overview. I think it took me longer than I expected, but I hope that you have now a sort of impression what this GIPR is all about. Again, the analysis in there is extensive. We have 10 countries. We have analysis for all the continents. We have analysis based on square meters, based on revenue. And of course, this digital and omni-channel model analysis is very, very extensive. So I hope you enjoyed this small presentation, and If there are questions now, Julian and I would be happy to answer them if we can. Thank you.
That was very, very interesting. I'm sure everyone will agree. So we do have a few questions inside the Q&A section. So I'm just going to read through the first one. The first one I have is from Paul Woodward. Thanks, Paul. He has asked, what is your sense? Can you hear this? So I'll speak clearly. What is your sense of how big a hit Chinese exhibitions have taken as a result of borders being closed and thus no international visitors and limits on international exhibitors who don't already have a China presence?
Yeah, to be honest, Paul, it's a great point. But our view is the hit has been very little, because I would say the vast majority of companies being active in China, they have their subsidiaries, they have their offices there, so they can participate through those. And then the Chinese domestic market is, as such, both on the exhibitor side and on the visitor side, is so strong that the fact that the international participation has decreased will not be of major consequence to the overall market. That's what we feel, and that is also the feedback we receive from let's say clients we have there and companies we work with.
Excellent. I hope that's answered your question, Paul.
Paul, does that answer your question?
We can't hear him, but
we can hear. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Good. Okay. We have another question. It seems to be a lot of questions from Paul's this morning. One from Paul Colston. He's asked, how did you source your new Chinese information for this edition?
Basically, what we use, and what I said at the very, very beginning, the data in China are very, very difficult because you have a number of data sources. We used all of them. On the venue side, we did our own research. So with our own people, we have an office in Shenzhen, and they did all the research. Then we used figures from CCPIT. We used figures from the Chinese Association of Exhibition Business. We used other reports. The issue is, first of all, to find out the real figures which we have today, but then also the trend figures. And I think UFI with PSG and Mark in Hong Kong, they've done a tremendous job in really showing the trends in the industry. And we believe that trend indication is most likely the most reliable one which we have now. In terms of status now, in terms of numbers, there is some deviations from what we have seen before based on our research, but we did that with our own people.
Excellent. There is a question here from Paul Grinnell. He's put in here, these geos are not making international attendance easy and are mainly open to domestic markets such as the USA. This difference is important to appreciate and could skew the numbers due to their massive populations? Question.
I think it's absolutely true. We believe that, of course, China's opening is mainly due to the pandemic and the control of the pandemic. But then markets like USA, UK, which are primarily domestic, will be the first or the next one to open. And as we said, with the example of Germany, we feel that really Germany is a country which will be most likely on the harder side to fully recover from the pandemic, because as long as international travel is restricted, these shows will take a hit. And we feel that also on the other side, exhibitors will very likely reduce their space requirements. They will realize that there is not so much space required to be at a show, so that will have an effect also. We will see reduced visitor numbers also because companies will be more selective in sending their people to shows. They will say, okay, we want you to go to this show, but not to every show. And they will be more restrictive in sending the number of people to those shows. So all in all, we see a short and medium term, this will have an effect on our business. Long term, we believe if we get the digital part right, we have a huge opportunity to digitally really empower our shows and get back to old strengths. But that will take a long time because, to be honest, I don't see any company who has been prepared to move into digital as quickly. So we see a lot of companies, they are doing trial and error with their concepts and so on and so forth. And in that regard, we believe it will take some time. And until then, we feel that the entire business will suffer based on these factors.
Excellent, excellent. We have another question here from Manuel Garcia. Do you believe in hybridization of events in the future post-COVID?
Yeah, I can take this one on. So what we do believe is critically important is that organizers integrate digital offerings in a seamless way with their physical events. And I think the term of hybridization implies that both is happening simultaneously. What we believe is that digital offerings, if they are connected to the physical event in a proper way, they can extend the value creation that you have on a physical event all year around. And therefore, you need strong digital offerings which are standalone on their own during two physical events. And then what you see is that the community comes together at a physical event to really be physically there and enjoy their face-to-face interaction. And here, the digital can support this, make this easier, make this more comfortable, but you don't have a term of hybridization that in the moment that you are face-to-face, you're also in the digital world. No, it's more of combining the two in an integrated way all year long.
Yeah, and I think what we've seen, particularly in 2020 and beginning of 2021, was exactly that attempt. We do a hybrid event, and that is fine as long as you say the money we spend for that is just being spent because we want to stay in contact with our customers. But if you now look ahead of the time and you have a physical show again, you need carefully to think about how do you want to integrate digital and physical. Because in the past, it was like, we don't have a physical show, so let's make a hybrid event. Easy decision, But in the future, you have the physical show, and whatever you do digitally needs to be adapted to the needs of those who are at the physical event and who might not be at the physical event. So the whole concept of whatever has been done digitally in the past needs to change in the future.
Excellent, very good. Paul Colston's asked another question, and he's asked it of you, Julian. Can you share at least a couple of the lessons from the retail industry for our sector in terms of the omni-channel approach? Just give us a bit of a kind of insight into that.
Of course. So the first one is that the omni-channel transformation in the retail sector has also changed how we consume. It has affected the behavior of the consumer, which means that once you have a real and good omni-channel integration in the trade fair industry, people will also consume a trade fair differently. They will also adapt their behavior with the new digital offerings which are emerging. The second one is that it has been for some retail companies extremely dangerous to not act, because as digital offerings have the potential to create a better value and to augment the overall experience of consumers, what you see that some companies have exploited this, and they have created really strong omni-channel offerings and experiences for the consumer. And by doing that, they have increased the competitive pressure And companies who didn't react and who believed that physical only is enough, well, at some point, they didn't fulfill anymore the customer expectations because the customer expectations moved on. Omnichannel has augmented them. And companies who did not react to it, well, at some point, they lost their competitive position.
Yep.
Excellent. Very interesting. I have a question here from, and you have to apologize for pronunciation. Is it Niloy de Banath? What do you think will happen to organisers who are sitting on the fence without embracing digital at all, hoping that they will be back to normal by Q3, Q4 21?
For me, it's very easy. The only thing I can wish them is good luck.
I think the real risk is that you will see the same as happened in the retail industry. You will have competitors, organizers who will integrate digital offerings in their overall offering, and it will make their offering better. So your competitor becomes better while you are staying where you are. So guess what's happening? The customer is moving to your competitor, and you're at some point, let's say in 5 to 10 years, are running out of business, especially as the trade fair industry is really reliant on network effects. So if already a small number of your customers, the attendees of a show, go to another show, it can create a landslide.
And imagine what Julian, I've said before. Imagine the possibility in terms of reach extension you have with the digital, and just imagine you're not doing that and a competitor does it. I mean, you lose momentum. And on top of that, you have to look at the industry, and if your industry you're serving is digitalizing, you better do that as well.
Excellent. A good evening from Michael Duck. He's on here quite late. So he's asked this question: do you believe that as probably global airlines will insist on vaccination, double in brackets, before getting on an aircraft, that in Europe, that exhibition venues, governments will ask for a full vaccination for entrance as well? Any other geographies you'd like to comment on?
I believe it will be the case, Michael. I think that we can see that already now. The EU is working on a digital passport, which they say should be in place sometime at the beginning of the second half of 2021. And that digital passport has basically three things. First of all, the vaccination proof, where you can say, okay, I'm fully vaccinated, or the full recovery from an infection, or a very, very recent PCR test. So that digital passport will show either of those three, or two of those three, or might be three. And with that digital passport, you can then go into theaters. That's the idea, at least. You can go into aircrafts, and you can go into railways and public transport and what have you. And I could very well imagine that they apply the same system now for what we call the high contact industry. That's us.
Yes, absolutely. We have a mixture of a comment and a question from our delightful friend Ravinda in India. I hope you're well, Ravinda. We do miss your famous face-to-face UFI presentations. Would you like to come back to one of those? Personally, I miss them.
Are you asking Julian or me?
I think it's Ravinda asking you.
I've never been to a UFI presentation.
I know. Ravinda, I don't know. Yeah, let's leave it at that, and that's fine. Yeah, and you're not the first one who's saying that, and of course, I must say I do appreciate. I'm happy to get that response, but let's wait and see. Thanks, Ravinda. Anyway,
we have a few more questions here. So this one is from Ian Sterling. With the rollout of the vaccination taking so long in Africa, Do you see international events only returning in 2023 as well?
I think we cover also in the report which type of events we see returning earlier. And one has to distinguish between regional, national shows, export-oriented shows, import-oriented shows, and really international shows. So there are two major dimensions here. It's how international your visitors are, how international your exhibitors are. All of this is covered in detail in the report. Overall, we believe, especially for the international events, a full recovery will be really difficult unless you have a full vaccination coverage, because again, you have network effects on these international events. You want to join because of its international dimension. So if it's not as international anymore, there is less incentive to join. So I think it's critically important for the trade fair industry that a full and widespread vaccination coverage is achieved.
Great. Yep. Great. And then the last question we have, unless there's any more, is from Michael Den. It may be counterintuitive, but is it so much harder to generate a large online audience, or even harder to transfer a loyal physical audience online? How do you think this will change?
Julien, you want to take that?
So I think transferring, first of all, the digital space has one big advantage compared to the physical space. It's not that capacity constrained. In a venue, you can maybe get up to 100,000 visitors in a really large one. Online, you can have as many visitors as you want. So really hosting an extremely large number of audience, or really large audience base is per se easier digitally. The question is how well the digital offering is designed in order to engage such a large audience. So it has to be really high quality content, and you have to make sure that for each segment of this audience there's something in, and that's quite difficult. So I think for keeping a really good quality audience, physical events are better, because there is already a commitment of going to the physical event, and only people who are really interested in buying would go to a physical event. So the quality of the audience is better at a physical event, but the size of the audience, I think here digital formats can have an edge.
Excellent. Well, look, gentlemen, thank you very much. That concludes our questions. I personally wanted to say that it's an incredible amount of work I've seen that you guys have put into this report. Would you like to just explain quickly when the report will be available, and yeah, what
Sure.
else is included in that?
I think Jochen, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. That's fine.
So orders are open now, so you can order the report whenever you want from now on. Also, I really have to emphasize, you've seen around 10% of what's included in the report in this preview. So it's much, much, much more than what we've shown here. And then my third point is we will be sending out the report once the orders have been registered and validated. And we will send validated orders out end of May. So end of next week.
Yeah, and just one thing to add, perhaps important to note. We've done it this time a little bit differently than the other times before. We will send the reports out end of May, beginning of June. And then mid of June, we will have 3 webinars where we will touch on these 3 different chapters, basically global economy and industry performance 1. Second one will be China, and third one will be digital and omnichannel. For each of these chapters, we have 1 webinar for those basically who bought the report. And the idea is basically that everybody can read the report, go through it, And there will be, we believe there will be a lot of questions, there will be a lot of comments and so on. And the idea is to discuss all those questions and comments in these webinars. That's the basic idea. So it's the other way around as we normally do. Normally first present and then send out the report. But here we want to send out the report first and then have that webinar to discuss with the peers, basically, what are their concerns, what are their views, what are their questions, and what are their comments. And we believe that can be very, very fruitful in these discussions also.
Fantastic. And I believe Sonia's dropped a link in the chat just for where you can order that report. Well, look, thank you very much. Thank you for everyone who's attended. I hope you found that it was interesting as I have. And we look forward to seeing you again, hopefully in June for the other webinars.